from there, I kind of moved to a space that was in a forest, and there was an area about the size of a football field that had been kind of cleared. There were lots of tree stumps there, like it had been chopped down. And I had this vision of this planet in the sky, very close to Earth, far too close for reality, because gravitational fields and magnetic fields would have caused too much problems. But there was a pathway coming down from that planet to where I was standing, and I was with all these adults, and there was all these children dressed in white coming down the pathway, and the adults were greeting them, and the big hugs and smiles and things. I said to the hypnotherapist, all this is going on, and she said, it sounds very positive. And I don't know why, but I said, no, there's something happening here. And then I had this message, which maybe was from the Greys, that said, when the planets meet, the children will return.
Welcome. I'm here with Simon Bown. Simon, welcome back.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about near-death experiences and your book. If you just say the name of the book so people can find it. It'll also be listed below, but I want to give you a chance at the front end to just mention it.
It's Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife. There's 30 near-death experiences in there.
And you can find it anywhere books are sold. Okay. But today, we're not talking about near-death experiences. We're talking about, I guess, one of its cousins, which would be past lives, past life regression, things like that. And in the last episode, you mentioned being a clinical hypnotherapist, and you've used that or those techniques to regress people in the past life. So let's start from the top. When you went to become a clinical hypnotherapist, was it so that you could do this in particular, or did this kind of stem as an outgrowth of that?
No, this is what my target was, because I was taken through my first past life regression maybe 1987, and taken through a number of them over time. And it was always just an interest of exploration to see what was there, because it can be therapeutic and people use past life regression for therapy. And after I'd been taken through a few, I wanted to take people through it. So I got my diploma in clinical hypnotherapy. So I've done hundreds of sessions with people now.
And for the skeptics out there, what's the strongest skeptical argument about past life regressions?
Well, the skeptics may say you may be remembering a story, a book you read, like when you were 10 years old or when you're 20, and then 20 years later you've forgotten about the book, but your mind regurgitates it. Or it may be something you saw on TV or something you were talking to somebody about, and your brain's just making this stuff up. But there are people who have past life regressions who then find the past life and verify that they were real.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at Baen.com.
And then what about alternative explanations? So, as an example, I'm just going to make one up on the spot. How do you know that during these regressions, you're talking to the same consciousness? There's not some other consciousness that perhaps it's a disembodied entity that comes in, kind of possesses the body and kind of tells their life history or something like that. Again, I just made that up, but how do we know that that's not the case?
When you're hypnotized, you're not like unconscious or something. You're still completely aware of the room you're in. You feel like you could stop anytime you want and you remember it all. It's just like being very, very relaxed. And your brain goes into the same waves that would be when you're just about to fall asleep and you're very, very relaxed there. And also, well, I've been taken through these and I know it's me. And what happens is you get knowledge and emotions coming, but you get a ton of these visualizations that are coming up. They come up in your imagination. They can seem like you're making it up, but they come to you spontaneously. You're not generating them yourself. And also the past lives can be so unexpected and unpredictable, but in the same way they make perfect sense in the way they relate to your current life. And so my personal experience of being taken through them, I think there's no way it could be another spirit coming in or consciousness or something. I have had a small number of sessions where what I do is we go through the past lives and then we go into the space between lives. And it's the afterlife, so to speak. And it's there that we would hope to encounter your spirit guide. And I've had a small number of sessions where I've been talking to the person and they're so relaxed, they just talk really quietly and slowly. And then suddenly in that space, their voice becomes very powerful and it talks about them in the third person. And it seems to me it's the spirit guide that's taken control and is talking to me rather than it's the person that's doing it. It's because of the strength of the voice. And they talk about them like, if it was you, you'd say, oh, well, Sean is doing this and Sean is doing that. Not I am doing this.
And what sorts of messages do you get when that happens?
Well, they talk about the person in some way. It may be that they're in a particular point in their life that they're looking for information about. Might be a relationship or something. Or it might be their whole life they've had anxiety over something and the spirit guide might be saying, yeah, what they need to do is start doing this thing and start doing that thing and put this thing aside that's worrying them. This is not something they need to worry about, and sort of giving advice and talking about the person like that.
Now, let's start with yourself. When you had your first past life regression in 1987, what happened? And why did you choose to seek that? What prompted that?
Well, because I was going to the College of Psychic Studies and you could pay a little bit of money to sit with people who were studying there. I wasn't a student. And so I paid some money to do a past life regression. It was almost like I was looking at the menu every couple of weeks. I see a medium, so I see a channel. Oh, I'll try this past life regression thing. And it lasted about an hour and a half. And so I was hypnotized, taken down into it. And she got me to this point where I entered the past life and I saw myself in this park and I was like a 6-year-old girl and there were my parents there and a pet dog and they had a pram with a baby in it and I just knew that was my little brother. I knew that the father in that life is a friend of mine in this life. And the park was it's a weird sort of design for a park. If you were planning a town, you wouldn't put a park there because it was a really steep slope. And I was running around it. I could feel the grass between my toes. And there was a point I snuck my eyes open a little bit and I could see like almost little feet where my knees are.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
And it was just very strong and powerful. And a couple of years later, I was in a part of North London that I'd never been to before. And there was that park. And the houses around the area were exactly as I'd seen in my past life regression. And because it's such a distinctive park, there aren't any others like it. Not in London that I've seen. But it was exactly as I'd seen it. And that was 1895. When I saw that past life. It's because things don't get updated much in London and they got big Victorian houses and things. But I then saw in that life that when I got older, I was a nurse in the First World War. I was in France just a few miles behind the front line. And I was in this huge, long canvas tent with all these beds in it. There were all these men coming in with these terrible wounds. They'd just been hurt on the front line. And we were very busy rushing up and down, looking after all these men, with these really terrible injuries. And so I saw all of that, and it was very powerful and very emotional. And it's like when I did a past life regression another time, somebody said, well, if you were going to make up a life for yourself, is that what you make up for yourself? And I was thinking, well, no, I'd be a Spitfire pilot in the Second World War. I wouldn't choose to be a nurse in the First World War. But then a few years later, I did another past life regression, and I went back to that life. But this time I was older, and I was on a street in London, and we were standing next to this old car that looked like it was maybe 1930s. And I was opposite this man who I just knew was my husband, and he was really talking down to me. He was very patronizing, and I felt really angry in that moment. And it was almost like, you don't know what I'm capable of. You don't know what I've done in my life. You don't know about what I did in the war and how I dealt with all these terrible things that were going on. So it was interesting to me that in that room with the hypnotherapist, I got so angry. And you think, if you're just imagining it, you don't get that wound up. But I saw other past lives during past life regressions, and other weird things have happened to me during them. There was one where I saw myself as a young boy, maybe 17, in London, and I was wearing this suit, and it was new, and I had my hair just cut, and I thought I was fantastic. I was like, yeah, check me out. And I walked into this pub, and suddenly I just shot up into the sky, and I went way up above the earth, and I was in orbit, and there was this big black hole in space next to me, and I went over to it, and I looked into it, and I was too scared to go down into it. And then an instant later, I was back in the room with the hypnotherapist, and I felt there was a face here, and it was like its cheek was touching my cheek, and it was looking down this way, had a huge smile on his face. And I had kind of a telepathic communication where they said, we're so pleased you came and did this here today. We're so happy you're here. And on my right, there was a wall that was maybe 3 feet away, but I could see through it. It was like 20 feet, this really bright light, and all these people standing in front of it, like a silhouette of maybe 20 people. They all seemed to be really happy. And then the face said to me, okay, that's it. That's all you need today. That's all you need to see. And then I was back in the room. And it wasn't a thing where the hypnotist needed to count me up out of the hypnosis and bring me back. I was just thrown out of it. So it was, my past life regression was kind of hijacked by the spirits.
Yeah, what exactly was that? How did you interpret that event?
Well, there's this idea, I think it sort of started with a guy called Michael Newton, and the space between lives, of that you have your soul group and you have your spirit guides. So I think that perhaps that was my soul group. My spirit guide was there with me. And I've seen the spirit guide show up in other past life regressions that I've done. But Michael Newton was taking people through past life regressions, and he started taking people past the death to see what would happen. And over the course of years, there's maybe 7,000 clients. They all pretty much said the same thing about how they went into that space and they met with their soul group and their spirit guides, and they looked over their life, and they were taken to another group of people that are kind of named the Council of Elders. It's like they're much more experienced spirit guides, and you talk to them and your spirit guides with you, and they give you advice. And then you may go to a healing place, you may go to a place of knowledge. And then after a certain amount of time, you decide, right now, I'm going to have another life. So you start planning out the next life, and you choose which body you're going to have, and you choose your parents, and people in your soul group will incarnate with you, and you will work together. And it might be like, well, in my next life, I've got to have a father who's really awful. And one of the soul group members go, I'll be your father. I can be really awful. And it's almost like they're putting on a play, and they're all taking their own different parts to play. And then in another life, I might be an awful father to that soul. And it's that thing of your soul comes into each life to learn a lesson, to learn all there is to be human. So it's a thing of reading many books, and that's how I got into past life regression, is doing that first one, finding that verification, and then I get this kind of feeling that now is the time to do it. And I wonder if there's some kind of influence from the spirit world that they get to a point, it's okay, now we've got something else to show you.
What other past life regressions have you had? I mean, you just talk about now, right? And you also talk about the first example of the nurse. Again, I only have two examples, but 100% of them involve some sort of healing. Is that kind of a theme that you've seen in prior lives in addition to that nurse?
No, not for myself, really. A lot of people come to me looking for some kind of healing, some kind of therapy. But whenever I did it, I wasn't looking for that. It was just to explore. And I've got this idea that the past lives you see in a session are chosen for you by your spirit guides. And they know all of your past lives. And when I do a session, if somebody needs therapy, before we go into the past life, I'll say, Spirit Guide, will you show us a past life? And I might say, show us the past life that is the origin point of this issue. Or if they're exploring, I might just say, please show us the past life that would be most beneficial to see today. Sometimes it's almost like the spirit guides are going, oh, no, tough, you're getting therapy. And then something really powerful will come along. But for me, it was always exploration.
What sorts of, I guess, what was if you look back at some of your prior regressions, what was the most startling?
Well, I had this past life regression from a woman who does a technique called QHHT, which is quantum healing hypnotherapy.
Mary Rodwell, maybe?
That was Dolores Cannon.
Oh, yeah.
She came up with it. And this woman that I went to, she trained with Dolores Cannon in this technique. And so she took me into this past life. This is another of my female lives. I have had male lives as well. And I saw myself as a young woman in Venice. It seemed to be, I think, the 16th or 17th century. And there's all these different things happened. And I can still see it in my mind right now, the exact locations, exactly how the buildings looked, and this courtyard I was in, and then the house I was in. And there was this point where I first appeared in this kind of courtyard, this big space that was very Venetian with the way the houses looked and the colours that they were like 3 or 4 stories high. There was this big fountain in the middle, and I had this piece of paper in my hand, and I knew I had to deliver it to someone. And in the corner was this chapel, and I went through the doors. I handed this piece of paper to a priest, and he looked at it and read it. He didn't look very happy. And he was like, okay, you can go now. I don't know what was on the bit of paper. And I felt, yeah, I've done my job. That was on my mission here. And I walked back out to where there was a canal, and I got on this boat, and there were 2 men on it. And they took me to a house that was kind of its own mooring. It seemed like a very rich person's house, and I was the daughter there. So all these different things happened about how I was married off to a rich man's son, and it was bringing 2 families together. Sounds a bit mafia, doesn't it? In Italian sort of thing. So I saw the wedding day, and then I committed suicide on the end of that day by jumping out of a window. And I was kind of floating over the body as a ball of light, looking down on it. And that's when the hypnotherapist said, okay, now just drift away from this space, just drift away. And I was like, okay, and I'm floating up and away. And then I went from 0 to 100, where I was terrified. And the hypnotherapist told me afterwards she could see my muscles quivering because I was so scared. And she was saying, now tell me what you see, just tell me what you see. And I didn't want to say it. But I was lying on this table with these grey aliens either side of me. And I was naked, and they had this contraption, and they were doing something down to my stomach. And that was really scary. Then from there, I kind of moved to a space that was in a forest, and there was an area about the size of a football field that had been kind of cleared. There were lots of tree stumps there, like it had been chopped down. And I had this vision of this planet in the sky, very close to Earth, far too close for reality, because gravitational fields and magnetic fields would have caused too much problems. But there was a pathway coming down from that planet to where I was standing, And I was with all these adults, and there was all these children dressed in white coming down the pathway, and the adults were greeting them, and the big hugs and smiles and things. I said to the hypnotherapist, all this is going on. And she said, oh, it sounds very positive. And I don't know why, but I said, no, there's something happening here. And then I had this message, which maybe was from the Greys, that said, when the planets meet, the children will return. And then the next thing I knew, I was back in that room with these Greys, and there was one either side of me, and I was standing up, and they led me over to a wall, and a hole opened up in the wall, and it was like a cookie cutter shape of me that I could fit into this hole. And it didn't lead through to a corridor or another room. It was just this massive energetic space with all these colours swirling and what have you. And I went into it, and then it was like I was doing 100 miles an hour through this space. And I got the impression of other people in there as well. We're all going in the same direction. And then I found myself in a room that was long and thin, kind of like a railway carriage. And it was all white. And there were these chairs down the sides that were kind of moulded into the walls. And there were clothes everywhere, and there were other people in there. Everybody's naked. And I got this message from the Greys, this like telepathy that said, no one goes home till you've got your clothes on. And I went down to the end of this room. There were a Greys, one either side of this big hole in the floor, and I stepped into this hole. And the next thing I was back in my flat in London. It was like 2 a.m. And I went to bed, and then I got up the next morning and went to work like nothing had happened. So that whole memory cropped up during my past life regression. And one of the things about it is that it wasn't that I went to her and said, I think I might have had an ET experience. Can we investigate this? We weren't looking for that at all. So maybe somebody could argue, well, it was the power of suggestion in hypnosis that, you made that up because you were looking for it. But we weren't looking for it at all. It was completely spontaneous.
What do you think that message was about the planets, when the planets meet and, the children will return? And why was it so dark?
I'm not sure. It reminds me of the hybrid children thing that's part of alien abductions. Where people are abducted and women say their eggs are taken, or even fetuses are taken, and men say their sperm is taken, and then they're introduced to a child on the craft which seems a hybrid of human and alien. And so that's what it reminded me of, those children. But in the vision I have, I don't remember the children being hybrids. They just look human. But then there's also some people say that the hybrids are now so developed that they do look just human.
Why would it be dark in the sense? Why is that not good? Or why did you have the sense that it's not good?
I don't know, because it just came out of me, and I don't know why I said it. Let's like the guy David Jacobs, who was a researcher and wrote books on this. He thought the hybrid thing was a kind of invasion, that the hybrids were being made to replace us. But then there's other people who don't have such a dark viewpoint as him. And that maybe, you hear things like star children and light workers, and they come here to raise the vibrations.
It's all a framing issue.
Yeah.
Right. Like some people might look at it as upgrading, and some people might look at it as like a Trojan horse replacement sort of thing.
Yeah.
When people come to you for regression, what are sort of some of the motivations for them? Like what leads them to ask for this?
I've had people come who have pains in their body that they can't pinpoint the origin of. I had a guy who had really nasty pains in his stomach, and doctors had done all the checks and all the scans. They could find nothing wrong with him. I took him to a past life where we were saying, take us to the origin point of this. And in that past life, he was stabbed in the stomach, exactly where he has this pain in this life. And then we went to another past life after that, where he was terribly guilty about something. And he said he felt this guilt manifested in his stomach. So I did this thing where we do an energy release and remove the negative energy. And then the next time he booked a session with me, he said that the pains decreased by about 50%. He said he couldn't believe it. it's been there for years. And he said he sits there watching TV, poking himself in the belly because he can't believe how decreased the pain is. And then I have people who come, they might have a tremendous fear of water or of flying or being in a car. I had a woman who could not be a passenger in a car. She could drive it, but she couldn't bear being a passenger. And we went back to a past life where she was a young woman in the 1950s, and her boyfriend had this car, this new car that was convertible, and they went out in it and had this terrible accident, and they both died. And so maybe that something from that hung over and came into this life, of this fear of being a passenger in cars. So there's all sorts of things that come up.
Do people just come just because they're curious?
Oh, yeah. Maybe 30 or 40% of my clients come for that. And then we just see what comes up. And the way the session is structured is different than if it was a therapy session. Because if it's therapy, we're looking for an origin point and go searching for it, and then use techniques to break the bond with the past life and release negative energy. And maybe we ask the spirit guide about, why is this happening and that kind of thing.
Are there any risks to doing a past life regression?
No, I don't think so. It seems very harmless. There's a thing where sometimes people might have something coming through in this life because of a trauma in a past life. Like I said, that guy that got stabbed in the stomach. But we want to get an understanding of what happens there. We don't want to re-traumatize people. So if we get to a point where it looks like something traumatic is happening, and often I see people, I do this on Zoom and I have clients all over the world, often I see people in tears, really crying. But it's not like they're sobbing, but there's all these tears running down their face. And so it seems to be like some kind of energy release there when I come across something. But if there's something really traumatic, I have different techniques to step away from it. And the spirit guides are showing you this stuff for a reason. And they wouldn't show you anything that's bad for you. But what I might do is say, okay, now you're somebody else in the room. You remove yourself from your body. You're a third person there. You leave behind that body, leave behind the emotions and the sensations. But you can still see what happens. You get an understanding of what may have caused the problem in this life. And then if that's too much for that person, I might say, okay, now you're outside the room. There's this big, heavy locked door that's protecting you, but there's this small window and you can look through and see what's happening. So you keep taking steps away from it if you need to. But finally, at the beginning, when we're doing the hypnotic induction, I guide them into this garden that's a really nice place to be. And so if something really traumatic comes up, I can say to them, okay, just take yourself back to the garden. You're no longer in that life. You do not see anything that's happening there. And again, leave behind the emotions and the sensations. And I talk about this ball of light that surrounds you and goes right through you and is healing, and how it's a protective cocoon of light. And so you feel very protective. So we don't re-traumatize, but sometimes you see traumatic things and that's being shown to you so you understand why you're feeling the way you do in this life. And then for some reason it can really release that. And I'm not sure how it works, on a subconscious level. But I have people emailing me saying how much better they feel afterwards. And it may take a few days or weeks before they really start to notice it.
Are there any, or is there a particular percentage of the population that is either difficult or impossible to hypnotize?
I don't think anybody's impossible to hypnotize. If somebody actively goes against it during the session, then they won't be. But if you relax and give yourself over to it and follow the hypnotic induction, then you can be hypnotized. Some people go deeper than others. Some people it can be quite light, but you don't need to go very deep to have access to past lives. And I've had some people who don't get very hypnotized, don't see a past life, but it may be because they've had a really hard day at work and they're stressed and they've come to do this session and they're just not in the right frame of mind. But I also wonder if sometimes there's a thing with the spirit guides who choose which past lives you see. they feel that now is not the right time for you, so they don't show you anything, and they won't come and talk to you. I did a session where we saw past lives, and we went into that space between lives. The spirit guide showed up and said, I'm not going to talk to you. You're here to learn a lesson, and if I help you with it in the long term, that's bad. And then they just disappeared. So I think everybody can be hypnotized if they engage with the process.
What has been, I guess, the most fascinating session that you've had with somebody?
Oh, I took a guy to a past life, and I don't choose which past life's going to show up. One of the techniques I've got is that you're in that garden, and I say there's this wall with a gate, and you go over to the gate, and I say on the other side of this life is one of your past lives. I'm sorry, on the other side of this gate. And I say, okay, now open the gate and step through into that past life. So I don't know what's going to come up. They don't know what's going to come up. And then I'll say to them, okay, so where are you? Are you inside? You outside? He went to this life on another planet where he was a kind of aquatic animal, kind of like a dolphin. And it seemed to be very much a water world, and this intelligent species were all underwater. And he had a job. He was kind of like an apprentice to this creature that was really, really big, like much bigger than a blue whale. And it was part of this psychic thing that they were doing on there to do with energy. And his job was to look after this creature, to bring it the food it needs and all that kind of stuff. And this huge one would link in some kind of psychic, energetic web around the planet, which would bring good energy to the planet. And so going through that and just asking him what's happened next, what happens next. I didn't control any of it. This whole intense, intricate story showed up of this life on this planet. And later we got through to the point with the spirit guides. And I said, how many past lives has this guy had? And the spirit guide said, on this life, on this earth, this is the first one. You've never had a life on earth before. And it was like, asked them, why did you show us that past life? And they said, in that past life, you were in training to come to earth. Because in that life, you knew about positive energy and you were psychic. And that's what you're bringing through to this life. You've chosen to come here to sort of help the planet and spread positive psychic energy. That was really unexpected. I've had a couple of other people who've had past lives on other planets as well, but they were really quite fleeting.
What's been the most disturbing one that you went through?
Well, there's been a couple. There was one, we didn't stay in that life for very long. I didn't think it'd be fair to the client, but we stepped into the past life, and I said, well, where are you? She said, I'm watching the naked women and children walk into the gas chamber. I said to her, what are you wearing? And she said, I'm in a German uniform and I'm a man. And I thought, this is no good. We'll move away from this. We don't want to find out what happens here. And she was pleased that I did that. There was another woman that was maybe a couple of years before that. She was out in a field, and she was a woman, and there were some children there and some other adults, but they weren't really family. They were people from a village, and there were soldiers who were telling them to get on the back of this truck. And on the back of the truck, there were two soldiers, and she was sitting next to this little boy who was so scared. And she was trying to reassure him, but she knew that they were going to be taken into a field somewhere and executed, just a whole lot of them. So that's not very nice. That's disturbing. So I've taken people through all sorts of accidents and things, but they've kind of been beneficial in a way. But those two just didn't seem nice at all, and we didn't hang around for very long.
Have there been any that surprised you? Like, it could be surprise, could be they were a famous personality, or I don't know, whatever would kind of register surprise.
No, never had a famous person show up. As far as surprises go, nothing really surprises me. There's so many different past lives that people have gone to. I've had people go back to a time when we were just cavemen. A couple of people have gone back to ancient Egypt. Mostly the past lives I see are within the last 200 years, because a lot of it is helping somebody with this life, and it's something recent that's coming through. which is a bit of a weird thought because in the afterlife, time doesn't exist. So there's no such thing as recent. But there was a guy. See, I have to do client confidentiality, so I can't give you a lot of detail. But
the detail you're giving me is perfect. Yeah.
He has a website on a particular incident that happened in history where there were photographs taken of this execution, and he has this website that has all the photographs on it and all the information, and he's so good at this that historians around the planet will contact him as the primary source of what happened on that day. And he went back to the past life and found himself as the assistant to the photographer that was there on that day. And he saw things in that past life regression that he didn't know before. And he said to me afterwards, it makes perfect sense. I didn't think that that could have happened. But when I saw it in the past life, now I understand. It's like some of the photographs are in a terrible state and some of them are really nice. And in the past life, he saw this photographer. They were on, like glass plates in those days when they were having the photographs. And he'd look at some he wasn't happy with and just bin them. And they get all scratched and stuff. But him as the assistant, when the photographer had gone, he'd rescued them from the bin. And those were the ones that are rubbish in this life that he sees. And there was another thing where there were photographs taken from two different angles from different buildings. And he always thought they picked up the camera, which, was a huge thing on a tripod, and they carried it over to the other building. But in the past life regression, he saw they had another camera set up. And he was thinking, of course, why didn't I think of that? Mm-hmm. But, you could say he saw that past life because he knows so much about it, and that it was all his subconscious just making it up. Or you could say he has such an interest in it because that was his past life. But I don't know if it's surprising, but I found it very interesting that he had those kind of epiphanies while he was going through it.
In your sessions, have you found that there's a correlation between that? So, for instance, a correlation between having an interest in their current lives that's tied to a past life, right? So as the example you just spoke of, somebody was interested in a particular event that in this life, and whereas, they were actually at the event in a prior life. Is that something that's common?
No, I haven't come across that very often. I tend to come across relationships that repeat, maybe 3 or 4 lives where they're husband and wife, and the relationship doesn't work out in every life. And that's a recurring thing. Or occasionally it's you're the husband in this life and the life before you were the wife. And sometimes it's relationships with children that show up, and sometimes pets.
When you're talking to, or when spirit guides show up in these sessions, have you ever gotten a sense of how many prior lives people have?
Yeah, that's something I ask them just about every time. I've had people say 10, 15, others have said thousands. Some of them have said so many that it's the number's just astronomical. Because there is that thing that I think we're too Earth-centric, and we think about Earth as the center of everything, and reincarnation, all your lives are on Earth. But I hear this so often from different places, that there's life all over the galaxy, all over the universe, and that we incarnate on all these different planets. And depending on what we need and what we want to do, and we might choose to come to Earth for a number of lives because it's a place where you can learn particular things, and your soul needs to work those things out. And they say that Earth's a very tough school, but it's not the only tough school. And I hear that from near-death experiences as well as people in past life regressions.
Are there any instances, so you talked earlier about time is very different in the afterlife. Are there any instances where people have coincident lives, i.e. they may have a past life in, the 1940s, and then they regress again and they have another past life during that same time period?
Yeah, it's called parallel lives. There was a woman who did a past life regression, saw the spirit guide. The spirit guide said, you didn't learn the lesson. You got to go back. And so that past life died in 1968. And then the next life started in 1952. And so there were two lives going on at the same time. And they went to the end of the past life when they were 91. If you think about 1952, 91 years later, 1943? No, 2043. So he was seeing into the future then during the past life regression. And there's also this idea of multiverse where there's all sorts of different universes and you're living a life as Sean in every universe. And you have different experiences. And there's a weird thing with coma. People who've been in coma, a small number of them come out of it and say, I was living another life while I was in the coma. And they may even say they think this life's not the real one. And they're very sure about this. They say that other life was just as real as this one. There's no difference. My waking state, the physicality of it. I worked 9 to 5. I had an apartment. I went home. I had dinner. I had relationships. There was a woman who gave birth to a child, like grew up to be 4 years old. She lived those whole 4 years with that child. And then she woke up out of her coma. And she was grieving for the loss of her child. And everybody was saying, it was just a dream. Don't worry about it. And there was a guy who said he spent 22 years in another life on another Earth. And that Earth was slightly different than this one. And he did a tour of duty in a country in Southeast Asia that doesn't exist on this Earth. And that the McDonald's signs were different colours to the colours they are on this Earth. But they were just small little differences. Mm-hmm. And that's something that really fascinates me because those people don't accept it's a hallucination. They are absolutely sure that life is just as real as this one. And I heard something similar to that when I interviewed somebody who was having the alien abduction experiences, where they found themselves in this apartment that seemed strangely familiar, but they'd never been there before. And there were photographs on the side, and they were in the photographs with people they didn't recognize. And it was like another life. And there was a sort of person in the room that he'd catch a glimpse of them out the corner of his eye, and he'd look round and they weren't there. And that reminded me of these coma experiences.
Yeah, if you think about Hugh Everett's multiverse theory, it's basically every time a quark spins, right, it could spin up or spin down. And each time that happens, it creates a separate universe, right? So you scale that up probably trillions of trillion, a trillion times, and you get the numbers that are just unfathomable from a human perspective.
Yeah. Like every time you make a decision, a new timeline splits off.
Oh, it's even shorter than that, right? Like the time, and because quark spins, and and it just leads to that. So it just something like that would approach infinity, right? In terms of the number of possible combinations and permutations. So, yeah. How does the session work? Like, how long does it last? How does it start? How does it end? How do you deal with people who, start to get upset? Things like that. How does that whole process work?
There's sessions when I do them, they last around an hour. I have an hour and a half built into my calendar in case we need to go longer. If you're doing therapy, you can't just stop something and say, right, time's up. Yeah. And it starts off, I talk to the client about what the intention of the session is, what we're trying to achieve, how we're going to word the request to the spirit guide. And then we have the hypnotic induction, which takes 5-7 minutes, and it goes through different stages. And then we get to the point where we enter the past life. Then we spend most of the session looking at the past life or lives, depending on what comes up. Then we move into that space with the spirit guide, spend 15 minutes asking them questions, and I've got a whole load I work from. The client can give me questions for them. I ask them things like, why did you show us this past life? How's it related to your current life? What did you learn that you can use in this life? Is there anything negative coming through that we can clear? And we might ask, what is your purpose in this life? Are you on the right path? Is there anything you agreed to before you were born that you should be aware of? And we might ask to the guide, how can this person have a stronger connection to you? How many past lives have you had? All sorts of things like that. And then that would bring us to the end of the session. So yeah, and I record it all and I send the recording to the client. And so it lasts about an hour. So if you were to do life between lives regression, they can go 3 or 4 hours. But I don't do those. I'm not trained to do them. Even I've been taken through them and I know how they all work.
What sorts of answers do you get when you ask spirit guide kind of what this person's life purpose, like, do you always get an answer? Of the answers, are there certain categories that you frequently get? And then are there times where the spirit guide says this person's not ready yet to know?
Yeah, that comes up. Sometimes I ask a question and the guide says, why are you even asking? You know the answer. And we might say to them, so what is their purpose in this life? They say, well, you're here to be a teacher. You're here to teach people things. It might be that you're just here to be a mother this time, to be very loving with your children. In a past life, you were not a good mother. And in this life, you want to learn what it's like to be a good mother. Or you might be a child in the last life that had a bad mother, and now you're the bad mother in this life. And this is all a learning experience that you chose to go through. Or it might be the spirit guide say, well, you came here to learn a lesson, but you've learned it now, so we can let all this go, all these bad feelings you're having or whatever it is. Other times they say, you're right off the path, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. There's all sorts of things that come up.
When people get certain messages, so I'll take 2 examples. The first is, you're here because you're supposed to be a bad mother. How do people take that, and do they change their behavior, or is it already past? They were already a bad mother. Like, how do they react to that?
I think that they change their behavior and they hear the explanation the guide might give and think to themselves, that makes perfect sense. Because I talked to them after the hypnosis about what was experienced. I had this woman one time, we went to these 3 different past lives, and there was always a dog there, and the dog was very friendly, and she was trying to find out about something else. But when we saw the spirit guide, they said, you're here to interact with that dog. That's your purpose in this life. That dog has been your companion for many lives, and they're a spirit that works with you very closely. And you need to pay more attention to your dog in this life. And the woman said, that's absolutely right. We've got a dog, but I just leave it to my husband and the kids. I don't really pay much attention to it. So that was a weird kind of nudge to sort that out. And sometimes there's that, what did you agree to before you were born? And they said, well, you agreed that you would suffer this thing because it would teach you whatever it is that you need to learn.
With that sort of question, have you gotten instances where, I'm just making this up, but you agreed to die in this particular manner or doing this particular thing? Has something like that ever came up that like presaged something that was not pleasant that hadn't happened yet?
No, never had that come up. No, and there's never been a prediction of a death or said, oh, you're going to die soon or you're going to die young or anything like that. It's usually about the lesson that you're here to learn. And sometimes we ask the spirit guide, why did this person choose this body? And there was a woman she was laughing when she was telling me what the spirit guide said, that she chose to be good looking but not good looking enough, because she had to learn something. She had a previous life where she was so beautiful and she learned that lesson. And the woman was laughing. It's like, oh, thanks a lot. Great. Not good looking enough.
What about people you mentioned the people will get a message that they're not anywhere close to what they were supposed to be doing. What sorts of examples have you had there, and did they radically change their lives afterwards in a positive way?
Well, I don't know how much they changed their lives afterwards. Sometimes they email me, There may be, it's like that thing, how you should be paying more attention to your dog, or that you came into this life to have 2 children. You haven't had any children. Those children were supposed to be here to teach you something. And this person who's in the call is not even in a relationship, let alone a marriage. So that has come up. And
were they at least young enough to rectify that situation?
Yeah, I remember there was a woman that was maybe 60 years old who had that.
Oh, God.
And there was a man who was about 32 who had that. And, you know, I have had people who are gay coming into sessions and being told something like that, that it is that you should have a child, and that maybe that child's lesson is to learn what it's like to have a gay parent bringing them up or something, and they haven't had children, and they think, oh, okay, how am I going to do that then?
It could be arranged. There are ways. There are ways. I would be more worried if I were a 60-year-old woman, right? I mean, a 60-year-old man can still have a child, but a 60-year-old woman, you know, in only the most extreme cases, and even that, it's very likely not possible. I don't want to say it's impossible, but,
No.
you know, I never tried to say that. What kind of have you learned from all these experiences, from doing this for, how many years have you been doing it?
Hypnotherapy's, I think it's 9 years now, with the podcasting and reading up on all this kind of thing and learning all this information. It's been more like 30 or 40 years, maybe a bit longer than that, actually. So it's been a fascination my whole life, and I've always been reading books before the internet showed up, and then listening to podcasts, and now being a podcaster.
What, in terms of everything that seems to be going on with UAP, you know, the telepathy tapes has been a big thing that has come out recently. Where do you think humanity is in terms of opening up to some of these things that when we were children were kind of like scoffed at, laughed at, and things like that? Do you sense there's some sort of like an awakening or a quickening that's happening with this, or is it kind of the same old, same old?
I don't think it's the same old, same old. I think there's a lot more information out there, and a lot more study has been done of things like near-death experiences and children with past life memories. And there's lots of books out there now, and there wasn't before. So I think there's more people being aware of these ideas. But if you look around the world and you see what's going on with war and destruction, and it doesn't seem like the human race is getting any better. It seems like the human race is doing the same old, same old. But there's a thing with reincarnation that your soul comes here to learn certain lessons. And some of those lessons you'll need to suffer. So maybe the human race will always need suffering, because that helps the soul on their progression and their learning. There is people who talk about, you know, the human race moving to 5D. And I talked to Whitley Strieber, who talked about something called the fourth mind that we may be moving to. But they also kind of say that things are going to get bad, but afterwards it'll be a lot better. Yeah,
there's also military remote viewers like Lynn Buchanan, and also people who worked with remote viewers like Stefan Schwartz, who talk about kind of the time period now between 2020 and 2040, when in Lynn Buchanan's case, he basically says 3/4 of humanity are wiped out. So, I mean, I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, who knows? Maybe the clock started ticking with the administration of a certain medical remedy that I'm not going to mention because this video will get canceled. But yeah, it's just scary, scary stuff. But at the end of the day, if the consciousness survives death, you know, if we all don't make it, maybe it's okay.
Yeah, I think so. It's like I said, for me, I've had enough information to prove to me that there is an afterlife.
The one thing I didn't ask you, you mentioned this in the last episode. What is it with the white feathers?
Oh, I had a thing with the white feathers. I was interviewing a woman who'd written a book about angels, and that's not something I was really believed in or what, because I've never been religious. I didn't grow up in a religious family, and nobody in my neighborhood was religious. And so when you talk about angels, it sounds very Christian and white gowns and feathers and huge wings. And she was saying, you know, when there's an angel around, because you'll see a feather. And the next day I was walking down the street, and this feather just floats out the sky right in front of me. And I thought, oh, that reminds me of what she said. I didn't think much of it. And about 6 weeks later, I'm talking to a medium on the podcast, and we'd stopped recording. And I mentioned to her the thing with the feather. And she's saying, oh, yeah, if you see a feather, that's an indication that spirits are around or angels. And then we finished the call, and I went to talk to my teenage daughter. And she was very tidy young woman, and she doesn't have loads of stuff all over the floor. And I walked into her room, and there was a feather in the middle of the carpet in her room. And I said to her, where did the feather come from? And she was playing a game, and she looked over and says, oh, I don't know, and then went back to her game. And I thought, that's interesting. Just when I'm talking to this medium about feathers turning up in a weird way, a feather turns up in a weird way. I don't know where it came from or how could it get there. So a few weeks later, I go and see a medium, and I'm sitting in this chair opposite her on these big comfy armchairs, and there's the clean carpet between us, and we do about an hour of mediumship, and she's really good. And then I'm telling her about this thing with the feather that happened, and she just says, look at the floor. And I look down, there's a feather on the floor in between us, and it was not there the whole hour she was doing her mediumship. And neither of us got up and went anywhere or did anything. And it just, I saw it, and it was like my brain just came to a standstill. I could not compute. I just don't know where that feather came from. And it turned up, it was a white feather. And that was exactly when I was telling her about a feather turning up in a strange way. Again, a feather turns up in a strange way, but this one seems to have teleported in. And I almost wonder if, like, my spirit guides or somebody's trying to send me a message, some spiritual beings, and they keep trying, and they're almost slapping their foreheads. They're like, what do we have to do to get through to this guy? But then on the third one, with teleporting a feather in, that got through to me in the end. When I talk to people on the podcast about angels, they usually say they're spiritual beings. Don't think of the white gowns and the big wings and things. It's kind of like the spirit guides, or they're spiritual beings that haven't had a life on Earth, but they're around doing stuff.
Any final words for the audience?
Well, I suppose a rather nice thing is when I ask the spirit guides, just about every time, I ask them, do you have anything else you want to say to the client before we finish? And they say, we're always with you. We're always around you. We're always on your side. If you need help, then just ask for it. So that seems like a nice thing to end on.
All right. Well, Simon, I appreciate you, and thank you for sharing your experiences with my audience.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thanks.
I have too. Thank you.
Okay.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site. which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you could get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of a expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.